My name is Camille Atwood. I'm 30 years old, and last week my father called me crying. Not upset.
Not frustrated.
Actually crying. In 30 years of knowing Richard Atwood, I had never once heard that sound from him. But the strange part is this. 2 years earlier, when I called him in tears after hearing the words stage 3 cancer, he told me something I will never forget. After that moment, I went through 6 months of chemotherapy, 36 hospital visits, and the most terrifying year of my life. And during all of it, not one person in my family came to see me. They were too busy planning my brother's wedding. Now my father says he needs me. And my response to him was exactly 4 words. But before I tell you those 4 words, you need to understand what happened during the 2 years before that phone call. Because the story didn't begin with my father crying. It began with a phone call from my doctor.
Geschichte.
2 years ago, I was working as a senior graphic designer at a mid-sized creative agency in Boston. It was the kind of workplace that tried very hard to look cool. Exposed brick walls, minimalist furniture, and more indoor plants than any office reasonably needed. We had a coffee machine that cost more than my first car and a break room that smelled permanently like oat milk lattes.
I loved my job.
Not because it was glamorous, but because I had earned every inch of it. 5 years earlier, I started there as an unpaid intern. While most interns disappeared after 3 months, I stayed late, volunteered for every project, and learned everything I could. Eventually, I worked my way up to senior designer. No family connections.
No financial support.
Just long nights and stubborn determination. My apartment wasn't impressive either.
A small 1-bedroom in Somerville.
But it was mine. I had a routine that made me feel stable.
Coffee every morning at 6:30 Uhr.
Gym 3 times a week. Dinner with my best friend Harper every Thursday. And on the windowsill of my apartment sat a monstera plant that I had somehow kept alive for 3 years. Considering my usual track record with plants, that felt like a personal achievement. Life wasn't perfect, but it was predictable.
Until one Wednesday afternoon. Ein Männer Rost bei Spiel veniert, Rost während.
That day started like any other. I was in the middle of designing a campaign for a fintech startup client whose deadlines had already caused 3 minor office arguments. My laptop was open. Slack messages were pinging every 30 seconds. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Normally I would have ignored it. But something made me answer. "Miss Atwood?" a woman said politely. "This is Dr. Patterson's office. We have your biopsy results." Suddenly the entire room felt quiet.
I remember the strange details.
The way the light from the window reflected on the conference room glass. The exact taste of the coffee sitting beside my keyboard, lukewarm because I'd forgotten to drink it. "The doctor would like to see you tomorrow morning," she continued. "Can you come in at 8 o'clock? Her voice had a tone that told me everything before she said it. Doctors don't schedule urgent morning appointments for good news.
Imhomst nicht in wo.
That evening I barely ate dinner.
Food tasted like nothing.
My brain replayed the same thought over and over. They don't call you in for good news. The next morning I arrived at the hospital 15 minutes early. Dr. Patterson didn't waste time. "Camille," she said gently, "the biopsy shows stage 3 breast cancer." The words floated through the air like they belonged to someone else. "The tumor is aggressive," she continued. "We need to begin treatment as soon as possible." I sat in that office surrounded by framed medical diplomas and artificial plants, while my brain tried to understand what was happening. Cancer was something that happened to other people. Older people. Not someone in their 20s wearing a blazer because she thought she was going to work after the appointment. "Do you have someone who can drive you home?" the doctor asked. I thought about calling my friend Harper, but she was working a hospital shift. My coworkers were friendly but not close enough for something like this. And then, almost automatically, I said the words I hadn't expected.
"I'll call my dad." Echt einen wie dich, der Fahrkommzustand füllen.
To understand why that choice mattered, you need to understand my family. My father, Richard Atwood, believed something very simple. If he said something, it became law.
Not in a dramatic way.
In a quiet, immovable way that made everyone around him adapt. When I was growing up, nobody questioned my father. We simply followed his decisions. Despite years of feeling like the less important child, he was still the person my instincts turned to when things fell apart. Because that's what daughters do. When the world collapses, they call their father. I sat on a bench in the hospital hallway and dialed his number.
The phone rang twice.
"Camille," he answered. "I'm busy. What is it?" My hands were shaking. "Dad, I just left the doctor." "What about?" I swallowed. "I have cancer." I forced the words out slowly. Stage 3. Silence. For a moment I thought the call had dropped. "Dad?" I asked. "I heard you," he replied. In the background I could hear my mother asking him something. But instead of saying what I needed to hear, my father said something else. "Camille, this isn't a good time." I felt like I stopped breathing. "What do you mean?" "Your brother is planning his wedding," he said. "The ceremony is only 4 months away. There's a lot going on right now." I blinked in disbelief. "Dad, I have cancer." "You're a strong girl," he replied.
"You've always handled things yourself."
Then his voice hardened slightly. "We'll talk about this later." The line went dead.
Angsichte.
I sat on that hospital bench for nearly an hour. People walked past, patients, doctors, families. Nobody noticed me. Eventually I opened my phone and took a screenshot of the call log. I told myself it was because chemo might affect my memory. But deep down, I think part of me already understood something. Sometimes the truth needs proof. That screenshot became the first file in a folder on my phone. I named it simply Family. It would grow a lot larger over the next 6 months. Because while I was fighting cancer alone, my family was celebrating something else entirely.
My brother Derek's wedding.
And what happened during those months would eventually lead to the moment when my father called me crying. But the real turning point happened during my first chemotherapy session. Because that was the day I realized exactly how alone I was. And also the day I met someone who would change everything. My first chemotherapy session was scheduled 2 weeks after my diagnosis. Those 2 weeks felt unreal, like my life had suddenly split into 2 timelines. There was the version of my life before the diagnosis. Work deadlines, coffee runs, casual dinners with friends. And then there was the new version. Doctor appointments, blood tests, treatment schedules. Words like oncology and infusion suddenly becoming part of everyday conversation. The morning of my first chemo appointment, I drove myself to the hospital. The infusion center was on the 4th floor. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not silent exactly, but softer than normal life. The room was filled with large reclining chairs arranged in a half circle, each one beside an 4-pole and a small television mounted on an adjustable arm. It reminded me of a waiting area mixed with a hospital ward. The nurse at the desk smiled gently when I checked in. "First treatment?" she asked. I nodded. She handed me a clipboard full of paperwork. Then she led me to chair number 7. A nurse named Rita came over a few minutes later. She had kind eyes and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "First time can feel scary," she said gently while preparing the IV line. "Most people bring someone with them." I looked around the room. She was right. In chair 3, a woman sat wrapped in a blanket while her husband held her hand. In chair 5, a teenage boy listened while his mother read aloud from a book. In chair 9, an older man quietly ate soup while his daughter sat beside him talking softly. Every patient had someone. Except me. I forced a small smile. "I'll be okay." Rita didn't argue. But I could see the sympathy in her eyes. Liga, 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 liga. The chemotherapy drugs began dripping slowly into the IV. At first I didn't feel anything. Just the quiet hum of machines and the faint smell of disinfectant. But inside my chest, anxiety churned. I picked up my phone and sent my mother a text.
Starting chemo today.
"I'm really scared." 6 hours passed before she replied. By that time, I was already home, curled up on my bathroom floor with nausea that felt like waves crashing through my body. Her message read,
Hang in there, sweetie.
"I'm at the florist with Megan picking out wedding centerpieces. What do you think looks better, peonies or roses?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I took a screenshot and added it to the folder. After that, I typed a simple reply. "Roses are nice." I didn't tell her I had been vomiting for the past hour. I didn't tell her my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Because what was the point?
Nur.
The treatments continued. Every 3 weeks I returned to the same chair. Chair 7. By the 3rd session, the side effects had become more intense. Fatigue settled into my bones.
Food tasted like metal.
My hair started falling out slowly, strands collecting in the shower drain each morning. And still, every appointment I came alone.
That's when I met Harper.
She was a nurse practitioner who worked with the oncology department and ran a support program for cancer patients. One afternoon during my 3rd chemo session, she walked into the infusion room and stopped beside my chair. "You're always here by yourself," she said. Her tone wasn't pitying. Just curious. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. She smiled slightly. "I didn't ask if you were fine." She pulled up a chair and sat beside me. Harper had curly red hair tied back in a ponytail and the kind of steady eye contact that made people feel seen. I asked why you're always alone. Normally I would have brushed off the question. But chemo does something strange to your defenses. You become too tired to pretend. My family is busy, I said quietly.
With my brother's wedding.
Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened slightly.
When's the wedding?
October. She nodded thoughtfully. And when does your chemo end? November.
For a moment, she said nothing.
Then she spoke again. You know the hospital keeps visitor records for patients. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? Every visit is logged, she explained. It's mostly for security, but patients can request copies. Why would anyone want that? Sometimes people like to remember who was there for them. I didn't understand why she told me that. Not at first. But 3 days later, I submitted a request. And that's when the documentation started.
See.
By the time October arrived, I had completed 4 rounds of chemotherapy. My hair was gone.
My body felt fragile.
But I was still working remotely whenever I could manage it. I wasn't planning to attend my brother Derek's wedding. After everything that had happened, I didn't think I would be welcome. Still, a small part of me hoped my family might ask me to come. Even if it was just to sit quietly in the back. A week before the wedding, my father called. Camille, he said. We need to talk about the wedding.
Hope flickered inside me.
Maybe he was calling to invite me. Maybe he had realized how serious things were. But instead he said something else. Your mother and I think it's best if you don't attend. The hope disappeared instantly. What? You look unwell, he continued carefully.
You've lost weight.
Your hair. He hesitated. It's Derek's special day.
We don't want anything distracting from the celebration. Anything distracting.
Meaning me. Meaning the reminder that someone in their family was fighting cancer while everyone else focused on flower arrangements and seating charts. I understand, I said quietly. And I did. More than he realized.
Ich Höftlusten. The wedding happened without me.
I saw the photos later on social media. My father smiling proudly in a tailored suit. My mother wiping tears during the ceremony. Derek and Megan glowing beneath fairy lights. The caption read, "The happiest day of our family's life." I stared at the post for a long time. Then I took another screenshot and added it to the folder. After that, I closed the app and didn't open it again for months. Some things are painful enough to see only once.
An nicht gegreitet so geweinet. Wecker erschieden befürbraufhaaren und weißes Obe leben befürbrauf.
3 weeks after the wedding, the medical bills began arriving. Insurance covered most of the treatment. But not everything.
Deductibles.
Medication costs. Lab work. By the time I added everything together, I owed nearly $47,000. $47,000 just to stay alive.
I sold my car.
Cancelled every unnecessary expense. Cut my grocery budget in half. But it still wasn't enough. Eventually I did something I promised myself I wouldn't do. I asked my father for help. Dad, the medical bills are overwhelming. Could I borrow some money?
I'll pay you back.
I stared at the message for 20 minutes before pressing send. His reply came 2 hours later. Your mother and I just paid for Derek's wedding. We don't have extra right now. Maybe look into a personal loan.
I read the message 3 times. Waiting for something else.
An apology.
A question about my health.
Anything. But nothing came. So I took another screenshot, added it to the folder, and applied for a personal loan with 14% interest. Because survival doesn't wait for family approval.
Ich hab gegeben, wie es einen wissen und Gruppe können.
The worst night happened after my 4th chemo session. The nausea was unbearable. My body shook uncontrollably while I lay on the bathroom floor. That night my hair fell out completely. At 2:47 a.m., I called my mother. The phone rang. Then went to voicemail.
I called again. Voicemail.
Again.
Voicemail.
Finally, at 3:15 a.m., I texted Harper. I think I need help. She arrived 40 minutes later. Still wearing her hospital scrubs. She sat with me on the bathroom floor until sunrise. And that moment changed everything. Because Harper didn't just show up once. She kept showing up. Week after week. Appointment after appointment. And slowly she became the family I didn't have. But the story didn't end there. Because 2 years later, when my cancer was finally gone, my father would call me crying. And what he asked for that night would force me to face my family again. 2 years later, I heard the words I had been waiting for. No evidence of disease. Dr. Patterson said it with a small smile, the kind doctors reserve for moments that matter. Camille, she added gently, you did it. You're cancer-free. For a few seconds, I didn't react. I just sat there in the examination room, staring at the wall behind her where a framed medical certificate hung slightly crooked. 2 years. 2 years of treatment, fear, and recovery.
2 years of learning how to live with uncertainty.
And suddenly, the fight was over. Or at least, the worst part was. When I finally left the hospital, I walked into the parking garage and cried for almost an hour.
Not sad tears.
Not exactly happy ones either. More like the release of pressure that had been building in my chest since the day I heard the word cancer. For the first time in 2 years, I could breathe normally.
Ensere.
A lot had changed during those 2 years. My life looked completely different from the one I had before the diagnosis. For one thing, my career had taken off. During treatment, my boss had allowed me to work remotely whenever I felt well enough.
He never once made me feel like a burden.
You're talented, he told me once when I thanked him for the flexibility.
And talent is worth waiting for.
When I recovered, that support paid off. Within a year, I had been promoted to art director. My office had a window overlooking the Boston skyline. It felt surreal. The same girl who once worked unpaid internships was now leading entire creative campaigns.
Oh, en Achtung.
I also moved. I sold my small Somerville apartment and bought a modest condo in Beacon Hill. It wasn't huge, but it had tall windows and just enough space to feel peaceful.
My Monstera plant came with me.
Somehow it had survived everything. The chemo.
The long nights. The uncertainty.
I kept it by the window like a quiet symbol that survival was possible.
An. Deity an.
Harper remained the most important person in my life. She had become more than a friend. More like the sister I never had. Even after my treatments ended, we kept our routine. Dinner together every Thursday.
No matter how busy life got.
Sometimes we talked about work. Sometimes about relationships. Sometimes about nothing at all. But she had been there through the hardest days of my life. And that kind of loyalty doesn't disappear.
Es so.
My family, on the other hand, had faded into the background. For 2 years, contact between us had been minimal.
A birthday text here. A Happy New Year message there. Nothing personal.
Nothing meaningful. Just the polite distance people maintain with acquaintances. And honestly, I had accepted it. I built a life that didn't include them. A life that didn't need their approval. Then one evening everything changed.
Einige riebt.
It happened on a Thursday. I was cooking dinner. Salmon and roasted vegetables, nothing complicated, just something healthy. The kitchen smelled warm and comforting. My phone lit up on the counter.
The name on the screen made me freeze.
Dad. I stared at it for several seconds. We hadn't spoken on the phone in almost 2 years. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Let it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. I picked up. Hello? For a moment, there was only silence. Then I heard something strange.
My father's voice.
But it sounded different. Weaker. Camille, he said quietly. I need to see you. That was it. No greeting. No apology.
Just a request. What's going on?
I asked. There was a pause. Then he spoke again. I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
The words hung in the air. Early stage Parkinson's.
I knew enough from my own medical journey to understand what that meant. Not an immediate crisis, but a slow decline.
Tremors.
Loss of muscle control. Eventually, the inability to perform everyday tasks. My father continued speaking. The doctors say it will get worse over time. In the background, I could hear my mother's voice asking something. He ignored her. I need my family around me right now, he said. We're having dinner Sunday.
You should come. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone,
trying to process what I was hearing. We need to talk about the future, he added. The future. 2 years earlier, he hadn't had time to deal with my cancer. Now he wanted to discuss his illness.
Okay, I heard myself say.
I'll come.
An. Mit dem Verliebs ist gilt Teil 3 der kostschäftliche Führung und Stundenzeitteil.
After I hung up, something occurred to me. During the entire conversation, my father had never asked a single question. Not one. He didn't ask how my health was. He didn't ask whether I had survived the treatments. He didn't ask if I was okay. For all he knew, I could still be battling cancer. But that didn't matter. Because this call wasn't about me. It was about what he needed. See. I spent the next 2 days thinking about the upcoming dinner. The more I thought about it, the clearer the situation became. Early-stage Parkinson's requires long-term support. Doctor visits. Medication management. Daily assistance eventually. Someone would need to take responsibility for his care. And suddenly I understood why he had called. I was the obvious choice.
The daughter without a husband. Without children.
The daughter who had always been expected to sacrifice. I called Harper that night. "You're really going?" she asked. "I need to know what they want," I said. "And I need them to say it out loud." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked something important. "You still have that folder?" Of course I did.
The screenshots. The hospital records.
The visitor logs showing that no one from my family had come during my treatment. "Yes," I said. "Bring it," she replied. "Not to use,
Just in case you need a reminder of the truth. Die. Keraku.
Saturday night I opened the folder for the first time in months. Scrolling through it felt like reading a painful diary. Messages. Call logs.
Hospital records.
36 chemo visits. Visitor column. None. Seeing it all together reminded me why I had built a life without them. Why boundaries mattered. Why forgiveness couldn't be rushed.
Ich find einfach ausgibt er.
Sunday arrived quickly. I dressed carefully. Not to impress anyone, but to protect myself. Black trousers.
Cream silk blouse.
The navy cashmere scarf I bought to celebrate my remission. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone different from the girl who had sat crying in that hospital hallway 2 years earlier.
I saw someone stronger.
Someone who had survived.
Lebens.
My parents' house looked exactly the same.
White colonial. Black shutters.
Perfectly trimmed lawn.
The house I had grown up in.
The house where I had always felt like a guest. I sat in my car for several minutes before going inside.
Through the dining room window I could see silhouettes moving.
My family already gathered. Waiting. My phone buzzed with a message from Harper. "You survived cancer. You can survive dinner." I smiled slightly. Then I stepped out of the car and walked toward the door.
Because whatever my father wanted,
I was finally ready to hear it. But I had no idea how much that dinner would change everything. Because before the night ended, I would say 4 words that would leave my entire family speechless. Walking into my parents' house felt strangely familiar and distant at the same time. The scent of my mother's cooking drifted through the hallway. Roasted chicken, garlic, and something buttery that reminded me of childhood dinners. For a brief moment, the memories tried to soften the tension in my chest. But memories are complicated. They can comfort you and hurt you at the same time. When I stepped into the dining room, everyone looked up. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother was beside him, adjusting the silverware nervously. Across from them sat my brother Derek and his wife Megan. No one spoke at first. It had been almost 2 years since we had all been in the same room together. My father cleared his throat. "Camille," he said, forcing a smile. "You look good." I nodded politely. "Thank you." There were a dozen things he could have said in that moment.
How have you been?
How is your health? Did the treatment work? But none of those questions came. Instead, he gestured toward the empty chair. "Sit down." I took the seat quietly. Dinner began with small talk. My mother asked about my job. Derek mentioned something about work at his consulting firm. Megan talked about a vacation they were planning. The entire conversation felt like a play where everyone had memorized their lines but forgotten the plot. No one mentioned the reason I had been invited. Finally, halfway through the meal, my father set down his fork. His hands trembled slightly. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. "This illness, it's progressing faster than I expected," he said. My mother's eyes filled with tears immediately. "The doctors say I'll need help soon." The room became quiet. Everyone knew where the conversation was going. My father looked directly at me. "You're the only one who can do it." There it was. The request? Not even framed as a question. More like a conclusion he had already reached. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Do what?" "Take care of me," he replied.
You're a nurse.
Actually, I wasn't a nurse. I was a designer. But my father had always assumed my job existed to serve his needs. "You understand medical care better than anyone," he continued. "You're also the only one without a family to worry about." Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Megan stared down at her plate. Neither of them spoke. "You expect me to move back here?" I asked. "Yes," my father said. "Eventually, I may need daily assistance." He said it like the decision had already been finalized. Like my life could simply be rearranged to accommodate his needs. My mother nodded sadly.
We're all counting on you, Camille. Counting on me.
The phrase felt heavy. Almost ironic. Because 2 years earlier, when I had needed them, no one had counted on me at all.
Sieh an, I, sieh an, sieh an, sieh an, sieh an, sieh an, sieh an, I, sieh an, sieh an, sieh an, sieh an, un.
For a moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the kitchen clock filled the silence. Finally, Derek said something. "Camille has always been the responsible one." I looked at him. He offered a weak smile. "You know, dependable."
Dependable.
That word had followed me my entire life. It was the polite way my family described sacrifice. My father leaned forward. "You'll do it, right?" There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. He was completely certain of the answer. After all, he had raised me to say yes. But the girl who used to say yes to everything had changed. Slowly, calmly, I reached into my bag. I placed my phone on the table. Before I answer, I said, "There's something I want you to see." My father frowned. "What is this?" I unlocked the phone and opened the folder. The one labeled Family. Then I turned the screen toward him. The first image was the screenshot of our call from 2 years earlier. The day I told him I had cancer. The call that lasted less than 2 minutes.
You remember this?
I asked. He looked confused. That was a long time ago. I swiped to the next image.
A message from my mother about wedding flowers.
Sent while I was vomiting from chemotherapy. Another swipe.
Hospital visitor records. 36 treatment sessions.
Visitor column. None. The room became completely silent. Derek leaned closer to see the screen. Megan covered her mouth. My mother looked like she had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. "These are records from the hospital," I explained calmly. "They show every chemotherapy appointment I attended." I paused. Alone. My father shifted in his seat. "You're bringing this up now?" he asked. "You had cancer," he added quickly. "But that's over." The words hit the room like a slap. That's over. As if survival erased everything that happened. As if the past 2 years had been a minor inconvenience. I closed the folder. "Yes," I said quietly. "It is over." Then I looked directly at him. "And that's exactly why I can answer your question." My father waited. So did everyone else. The tension in the room felt almost physical. 2 years earlier, I had been the daughter begging for help. Now the roles had reversed. My father needed something from me. And for the first time in my life, I had the power to decide. I took a slow breath. Then I said the 4 words that would change everything. "I can't help you." The reaction was immediate. My mother gasped. "Camille!" Derek shook his head in disbelief. "You can't be serious." My father stared at me like he had misheard. "What did you say?" I kept my voice calm. "I said I can't help you." The room erupted. "How could you be so selfish?" my mother cried. "You're his daughter." Derek looked furious. "This is family." Even Megan spoke up. "People take care of their parents." I listened quietly while they spoke. Then I answered. "For 2 years I needed my family." I looked around the table. "Where were you?" No one had an answer. My father pushed his chair back angrily. "You're punishing us for the past," he snapped. "No," I replied softly. "I'm respecting my present." I stood up from the table. Cancer taught me something important. Everyone watched me. It taught me that life is too short to spend it begging people to care. I picked up my bag. "You made your choices 2 years ago. And tonight, I made mine." Then I walked toward the door. Behind me, my mother was crying. Derek was arguing with my father. But I didn't turn around. Because the conversation wasn't finished yet. The real consequences of that decision were about to unfold. And what happened after that dinner would change my family forever. When I stepped outside my parents' house that night, the air felt colder than I expected. Maybe it was the wind. Or maybe it was the weight of the conversation that had just ended. The front door closed behind me, and for the first time in years, I realized something surprising. I didn't feel guilty. For most of my life, walking away from my family would have filled me with anxiety. I would have replayed every word in my head, wondering if I had been too harsh. But that night was different. Because for the first time, I had finally said what needed to be said. And sometimes truth doesn't feel dramatic. Sometimes it simply feels quiet. The drive back to Boston took about 40 minutes. Traffic was light and the streets were mostly empty. My phone buzzed twice while I was driving. I didn't look at it. I already knew who it was. When I finally reached my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down on the couch. Only then did I check my phone. 3 missed calls.
All from my mother. 1 message from Derek. You embarrassed Dad tonight.
This could have been handled privately. I stared at the message for a moment before setting the phone aside. The strange thing about family conflict is that people often focus on the final moment, the confrontation. They rarely acknowledge the years of smaller moments that led to it. But I knew the truth. That dinner didn't create the problem. It simply revealed it. The next morning, I woke up early. Old habits are hard to break. Even after surviving cancer, my routine had stayed the same. Coffee at 6:30. A few minutes of quiet before the day began. I walked to the kitchen and opened the window slightly. Fresh air filled the apartment. My monstera plant sat on the windowsill, its broad green leaves catching the sunlight. 2 years earlier during my treatments, I had been convinced I might never see another normal morning. Now mornings like this felt like a gift. As I poured coffee into my mug, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Harper. How did the dinner go? I smiled slightly. Then I typed back. Exactly the way it needed to. Her reply came almost instantly. I'm proud of you.
3 simple words.
But they meant more than she probably realized. Because support doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it comes from the people who show up when you need them. A few days passed before my father contacted me again. The message was short. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. We already did. He didn't respond after that. And honestly, I wasn't expecting him to. My father had always believed he was right. Admitting otherwise would require something he had never practiced. Humility. A week later, my mother called again. This time I answered.
Camille, she said softly.
Her voice sounded tired. Your father hasn't been himself since that dinner. I didn't say anything. He didn't realize how much those years affected you. The words surprised me. Did he say that? No, she admitted quietly, but I can see it. She paused. Parkinson's has been difficult for him to accept. I'm sure it has, I replied. Silence settled between us for a moment. Then she asked something unexpected. Are you really okay now?
The question came 2 years too late.
But it was still the first time she had asked. Yes, I said. I'm healthy. I'm working. And I'm happy.
She exhaled slowly.
I'm glad. That was the closest thing to an apology she offered. And maybe it was the closest she could manage. Over the next few months, life continued moving forward. My career kept growing. Our agency landed a major international client, and I led the design team for the campaign. The project took 6 months and more late nights than I could count. But when it launched successfully, the company rewarded me with another promotion. Creative Director. Sometimes I thought about the version of myself who had sat crying in that hospital hallway 2 years earlier. She never would have believed this future was possible, but I can see it. She paused. Parkinson's has been difficult for him to accept. I'm sure it has, I replied. Silence settled between us for a moment. Then she asked something unexpected. "Are you really okay now?"
The question came 2 years too late.
But it was still the first time she had asked. "Yes," I said. "I'm healthy. I'm working. And I'm happy."
She exhaled slowly.
"I'm glad." That was the closest thing to an apology she offered. And maybe it was the closest she could manage. Over the next few months, life continued moving forward. My career kept growing. Our agency landed a major international client, and I led the design team for the campaign. The project took 6 months and more late nights than I could count. But when it launched successfully, the company rewarded me with another promotion. Creative Director. Sometimes I thought about the version of myself who had sat crying in that hospital hallway 2 years earlier. She never would have believed this future was possible. My relationship with my family changed permanently. Not dramatically. Just quietly. We spoke occasionally. Holiday texts. Brief phone calls. But the expectations were gone. No one asked me to move back. No one assumed I would sacrifice my life for theirs. For the first time, the boundaries were clear. And honestly, that clarity made everything easier. 6 months after that dinner, my father sent me a letter. Not a text. Not an email. An actual handwritten letter. His handwriting was shaky. Probably from the tremors. I read it slowly. In it, he admitted something I never expected. "I spent years believing strength meant never needing help," he wrote. "When you got sick, I didn't know how to face it." The letter continued for 2 pages. He didn't ask me to take care of him again. He didn't demand forgiveness. Instead, he ended with one sentence. "I hope someday we can start again." I folded the letter and placed it inside a drawer. Not because I rejected it, but because healing doesn't happen instantly. Sometimes it takes time. A year has passed since that dinner. My father's Parkinson's is progressing slowly. Derek and Megan eventually hired a professional caregiver to help my parents. That solution turned out to be better for everyone. I visit occasionally. Not out of obligation, but because I choose to. And that difference matters more than people realize. Every once in a while, someone asks me how I found the strength to say no that night. The truth is simple. Cancer changed the way I see time. When you spend months wondering whether you'll survive, you begin to understand something important. Life is too short to live it according to someone else's expectations. Especially when those expectations are built on guilt. The girl who once believed she owed her family everything is gone. In her place stands someone who understands her own worth. Someone who knows that survival isn't something you apologize for. It's something you honor. And sometimes honoring your life means making decisions that other people don't understand. But that's okay. Because the people who truly care about you will never ask you to sacrifice your life just to make theirs easier. And that is the lesson cancer taught me. Not about illness. Not about hospitals. But about the kind of life that is actually worth living.